by Kirill, but he's also had problems of transport. We're having an incredible heat wave in London. It's upsetting a lot of things. But just to sort of give a little bit of introduction while we're waiting, as you probably realize, this is the first translation into German of this text by Ilyenkov. It's been translated by Isa Jacobs. Unfortunately, she's had some issues that she couldn't attend tonight, but she sent her very, very sad apologies. But I will share with you in a second the text that some words that she sent of introduction. I will share them on the screen. But I just wanted to say that, first of all, this is being recorded, as you probably realize. Secondly, it's never been published. It was never published in Ilyenkov's lifetime. Sascha will explain that it was written probably in the mid-50s, 1950s, when Ilyenkov was about 30 years old. And I think Sascha will give some historical background, but it's absolutely great that it now exists in German. And as you may realize, it has been translated to English, but some years ago by Giuliano Vivaldi, and I shared the text with you already. Sascha and Martin Cooper co-edited this new book, which is published in Germany, obviously, and it's quite cheap if you can order it from where you are. Then you can read it yourselves if you can read German. Yeah, just about Sascha, because he knows this already. He will introduce for about half an hour, and then we'll have at least 45 minutes for discussion. And we'll probably finish around 7:15, but it looks like we're having a bit of a late start. That's 7:15, which is 8:15 in Europe. Sascha teaches and researches at the Institute for Liberal Arts and Sciences at Hamburg University. He's co-editor of Marxism and Sciences online journal. He's also editing a book series called Political Epistemology, and he's a member of the former East Initiative. His research interests cover the history and philosophy of science, society, and culture. He's also worked at the Max Planck Institute in Florence. I'm sorry, in Hamburg, not Florence. They have also, he's had a connection with Ca' Foscari University in Venice. So that's about Sascha.
It's probably a problem on my, I hope it will go away. I was quoting from a late text of Goethe, and there he speaks of the two great driving forces of all nature, the concept of polarity and that of increase. The former belonging to matter insofar as we conceive of it materially, the latter to spirit insofar as we conceive of it spiritually. The former is in a state of perpetual attraction and repulsion, the latter in a state of ceaseless striving up. But since matter can never exist or be effective without spirit, nor spirit without matter, matter is capable of intensifying, just as the spirit is and repelling. second example of a Ilyenkov's thought that I'm interested in. If we
Sascha, you're frozen.
see
We
those
can't hear you.
kind of similarities
Yeah,
in the
turn your
approach,
video off,
there's
Sascha.
no doubt that Kassira, Ilyenkov used this kind of idealist and Goethean figure, which of course is a Marxist heritage. I
Sascha,
want just to
Sascha,
say that
Sascha,
in the text, I think was missing a kind of philosophical and also contextuality of history.
Sascha, can you hear me? Sascha, Sascha, you need to turn your video off. We can't hear you. That's try again now.
Okay.
Yeah,
Is
but
it
you need
better?
to can you need to summarize what you've just said because people couldn't hear you.
I was just drawing on some similarities in the quote from Goethe to the approach Ilyenkov took in his text Cosmology of Spirit. Since Isa could not be here now, I brought this quote, but just to show that there's a longer history of the idea of how to come to grips with matter and spirit. And in Ilyenkov, this question, of course, is tried to be solved on materialist ground, but still the figure, the model is the same, that there must be a kind of interaction between matter and thought. And in this category, since Ilyenkov claims that there is matter and always thought. So both of it is important. And what he stresses in the beginning of the text and again is that this is not against the doctrine, let's say, of dialectical materialism, as, for example, Stalin in the infamous fourth chapter. So that's why I wanted to come to a kind of interpretation I recently presented in Cluj, and so the task was to show the kind of political and ethical concerns of Ilyenkov's cosmology, because this is an aspect I thought which was until now not really dealt with in the commentary text. There's a lot about monism, there's a lot about speculation, what could be the background of the inspiration of Ilyenkov's text, but my strategy would be not to present now all the context, the whole constellation this text stands in, but to concentrate on what Ilyenkov is doing in the text itself. So I started at this meeting with the question of today, and especially in face of the crisis, especially ecological crisis. So the question goes like this: once we know and believe that we need to do something, is there also a consequence that follows? And I think this is the question actually Ilyenkov deals with in the cosmology. The gap between knowing and knowing what to do with that knowledge is the precise space, if you will, the ethical interregnum, which I want to situate Ilyenkov's cosmology of spirit. My argument here is that Ilyenkov's cosmological speculation is not primarily the contribution to dialectical materialism or the philosophy of nature, as, for example, I quoted from Goethe. It is at least also is an ethics. More specifically, it expresses what I want to call a teleology without salvation, a structure of purpose that is cosmically grounded, yet devoid of consolation, that demands action precisely because it guarantees nothing, no promise whatsoever, just nothingness and necessity of freedom. In the talk, I gave a little background of Ilyenkov's biography, but I think I can skip this here. You all know he was in war, so I was evoking his war experience. And my argument there was, so to say, implicitly that Ilyenkov already had a kind of existential experience also, which might lead us to the idea that behind the text itself, which basically deals about a catastrophe, he always also was kind of invested in his own experiences. Still, as a doctoral student, he writes the text that concerns us today. This was in the early 50s, but we don't know exactly the date. Probably Corinna mentioned this already. Ilyenkov calls, at least in the version we have, the text a philosophical poetic phantasmagoria. I would say it is a science fiction in the strict sense. Full title is Cosmology of Spirit, an attempt to determine in general outline the objective role of thinking matter in the system of universal interaction. Every word here has a particular function for the argument of the whole text. Although the text was unpublished during Ilyenkov's lifetime, it circulated among Moscow intellectual circles, so to say, the so-called kitchen circles. It is said to have influenced a whole generation of Soviet intellectuals. The text, in other words, has the character of a message passed under the door of official thought, written after Hiroshima, in the shadow of Stalinism, and during the Sputnik era, reaching towards something the official doctrine could not contain, an almost mythical dimension, although it probably started quite mundane as a student term paper on Engels' Dialectics of Nature. So what exactly does Ilyenkov argue? Let me reconstruct the core. He begins the text with a statement that it does not defy, as I already mentioned, Diamond to say that matter and thought both exist. Everything is matter, but this raises the question this proposition cannot answer. If everything is matter, what is thinking and what is his, so to say, cosmological role? And this is exactly the question I think Ilyenkov tried to tackle with the text. And he found a lot of hints in Engels' Dialectics of Nature. His first major thesis in the text is matter always contains thinking. It constantly thinks itself. To be sure, he follows Engels here, who saw the error of the old materialism precisely in its inability to see necessity, where only contingency appeared to reign. Like, how did thought evolve? If thinking exists, it must be matter, a form of motion, a form of energy, but it's not accidentally material. Thinking has emerged necessarily from matter. This is the stronger proposition. It is not a mode, not a property that some particular arrangement of elements happens to produce. Thinking is an attribute of matter in Spinoza's sense, and necessary to matter as extension itself. This is quite a daring move, of course. It threatens to collapse the materialist priority of matter over mind. And Ilyenkov is, of course, well aware of this. He resolves it by changing the frame of reference. The necessity holds at the level of the totality, not at the level of any particular material configuration. The universe as a system of universal interaction, this is how he put it also in the title, necessarily produces thinking as its highest form of motion, locally contingent, cosmically necessary. This sets up the central question of the text. If thinking is an attribute of matter, then what is the role of thinking in the cosmos? Why do we have to speak of an interaction? Zizek called the move Ilyenkov makes in the text a genuinely mad move. But I think it's not that mad. It's quite logical following from the premises. Drawing on Engel's reflections on thermodynamics, Ilyenkov confronts the problem of entropy. The universe, modern science tells us, is moving toward heat death, a state of maximal entropy where all energy has diffused, all motion has ceased, all differentiated structure has dissolved into cold homogeneity. Engels had anticipated this and called it the fundamental problem for future natural science. How does the universe reset then? The whole development is kind of unilinear, right? So how does the first heat energy reconcentrate into the glowing nebula from which new suns may form? Ilyenkov's answer is that it is precisely the cosmological function of thinking matter. The mind, conscious, collective, developed to its highest capacity, has the role of deliberately triggering a thermodynamic reversal. In millions of years, as Ilyenkov says, as entropic heat death approaches, humanity's task as an agent of thought is to consciously decide to trigger its own annihilation. A self-induced cosmic conflagration disruptive enough to reverse the entropic process for a region of the universe, and by chain reaction, a bigger process sufficient to initiate a new cosmic circle, and with it, the conditions for new life and new thought. So in this move, nature and history, so to say, fall together. Yeah, nature as we can experience it, as we move in it, is already historical in this sense. We cannot know if not the circle before was already based on this kind of annihilation of thinking agents, of a society of thinking agents. This is, of course, the speculation here. The function of mind consists in the conscious recognition of the necessity of its own extinction in order to create a new cosmic circle. This is what we could call a transcendental apocalypse, an opening end as the condition of possibility for a new beginning. For if thinking is unanimously to fulfill its cosmic function, if in millions of years humanity as an agent of thought of the collective is to be capable of the collective decision to sacrifice itself for the regeneration of the universe, as Ilyenkov says, to pay the debt back to Mother Nature, then the conditions for that decision must be prepared across the entire arc of human history. And those conditions are anything but guaranteed. Ilyenkov is quite explicit here. Thinking mind can only fulfill its universal and historical task at the peak of its development. Here the political implications surface. Ilyenkov does not write a cosmology despite being a communist. Cosmology implies communism as a cosmic necessity. So it's this way around. It is simultaneously continuing and subverting dialectical materialism, producing the most radical possible demand for emancipatory politics precisely from within the official doctrine's own logic. But, and this is where the concept of teleology without salvation becomes decisive, Ilyenkov's cosmos promises nothing. There's no guarantee that thinking will fulfill its function. There's no providence, no dialectical iron law of history, no immanent eschatological promise. The cosmological ethics is defined precisely by this structure. There is cosmic purpose, but it becomes real only through an action. direction without guarantee, purpose without providence. Thought needs to be performed, of course. And in this way, even death becomes creative. This is a teleology because there's a genuine orientation, genuine goal directedness, but it is without salvation because no mechanism, not dialectic or anything else, it insists on collective decision against resignation before planetary catastrophe. I would say he insists on the irreplaceable role of practical activity. As if emancipation were cosmically necessary, while knowing it remains radically contingent. So my claim is here in short, maybe, that Ilyenkov's cosmology performs a kind of radical operation on the figure of interregnum. In Ilyenkov's sense, in his kind of view of, in his cosmology at least, it is not an historical accident. It's not a specific phase of history. It is the fundamental structure of material existence itself. Thinking matter always finds itself between an entropy it has not yet reversed and a new cosmic order it has not yet created. The in-between is not a problem to be solved, but the permanent condition of meaningful action. I think in Benjamin and Bloch or Krakauer, you find a similar kind of, let's say, motives of the kind of space in between. So this has consequences for how we think about religion, ideology, and political theology in general. It's obvious that they always make a promise, so it's tempting to follow. Political theology in its various forms, whether the messianic philosophy of history, the eschatological Marxism that reads the proletariat as the subject of a final redemption, or the more diffuse appeals to cosmological or planetary destiny and contemporary posthumanist speculation, all share a common structure. It's a structure of meaning, some logic of history or nature or being that promises that the right political act will be received, will find its place in a larger order, will matter in some absolute sense. And Ilyenkov's ethical move, so to say, is precisely the refusal of the guarantee involved, while retaining orientation. He does not say that action is meaningless because the outcome is uncertain. He says, on the contrary, this is exactly how it has to be. In effect, he says that an ideal to act upon is not an image, but a task. And the task is infinite, even if the universe, that means everything, in its present state, is not. I think here a certain kind of Kantian resonance becomes also obvious. Ilyenkov unites, I would say, Kant's starry sky above and moral law within in one. thoughts, but the whole point. But he strips that tradition of its consolatory structure, we could say. There's no redemption at the end of history. There's no moment at which the debt to the past and to Mother Nature is settled, at which the suffering of all previous generations is retroactively justified. There's only the ongoing, demanding, cosmically necessary, and historically contingent work of forming the conditions, intellectual, social, material, under which a genuinely collective decision demanded by the cosmos, the cosmic process itself, becomes possible. So to conclude, one of the most important points of Ilyenkov's text, which throws end, beginning, and its conditions into light, is to plead with the almost brutal instruments of cosmogony for tenderness of thinking, I would claim. It's a kind of resignated enthusiasm. It's not optimism, not the confidence that things will work out, but the insistence on acting, thinking, forming, transforming against entropy, toward extinction, in full knowledge that the outcome is not guaranteed, that the cosmos does not reward effort, and that the ideal is a task and not a promise. I think I will stop here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Sascha. That was very interesting. I'm sorry that we lost you for a while there. For some questions, might be asking you to repeat bits, but I think we'll start with Matt Bay, who has an interesting observation to share. If you can unmute yourself, Matt Bay. Otherwise, one of us will read it. Okay, I'll read it out loud, that's fine. Okay, so I wanted to contribute one idea that came to me after reading the text for the session. We can address it after the talk. On a side note of literary cinematic correlation of knowledge of the spirit, it's curious that Isaac Asimov's Last Question, his self-proclaimed best short story about AI overcoming humanity as its continuation in an immaterial form and its further enunciation of reverse entropy and the beginning by the technological absolute, was published in 1956 when Ilyenkov writes about the end of the thinking matter, the intellect. I wonder how his argument that the brain is the farthest point of the development of intellect can be reconfigured with a discourse on AI, its overcoming of humanity materially, intellectually, and a certain dark accelerationist reading of the end of the world as self-inflicted by the runaway artificial intelligence. Very rich question. Thanks, Matt Bay. Sascha, what do you think?
Unstableness.
You're cutting out the moment. Start again if you can.
Okay, I try again.
Thanks. We can hear.
In the text, Ilyenkov does not provide any particular hints towards this question. I think he much more went into the direction in his book on idols and ideals. This is now being translated by Trevor Wilson. I think we can then discuss about that much better. We already have the mystery of the black box translated, but up until now, I think this book is not very much talked about. If you are looking for hints on this kind of similarities and developments, I would say it is rather to be found there.
Great. It's a great question to get us started. Yeah, we can take others' view in this as well. Does anyone else have anything to say to begin a new question? Or, yeah, a comment on Anne's question about Asimov and accelerationism, or a new thread of discussion. If you can go to reactions and do raise hands, then that's good. Most helpful for me. I'm on my phone at the moment. Let's do. Okay, so yeah, George. Oh, sorry, I'll mute myself. So yeah.
I thank the speaker for this stimulating presentation. I would like to ask the following question. Can we say that this idea that humanity has a moral duty to sacrifice itself for the sake of the preservation, regeneration of the universe, qua, let's say, nature, does it not suggest a kind of moral basis for an ecological attitude in present circumstances? In other words, that somehow humanity must sacrifice its conveniences, its overconsumptionism, or change lifestyles or attitudes in order, and change, if you like, the framework of the way social relations are organized, and I have capitalism in mind, in order to maintain and preserve a balance with nature. So base a kind of ecological attitude throughout this kind of model of equilibrium that, in a sense, he presents in this kind of cosmic account. That's my question.
Okay, yeah, I think these are basically two questions. One about the sacrifice. I think the sacrifice is not, is so to say, not a sacrifice in terms of death. The death can only be in the future, in millions of years. And everybody has to be conscious about the decision. Humanity, as agent of thought, has to make this decision together, right? This is his idea. So sacrifice, of course, can mean anything, but I think it's not the proper word. It's, of course, this sacrifice will only be possible. So nobody has to sacrifice himself or herself. But the motivation of Ilyenkov is rather to say, well, we cannot even make that. We can never achieve that if we don't do it now. So it's about more a matter of the labor you invest. So this is the first. The second thing, yeah, I think there's a long tradition Ilyenkov is drawing on in the piece. It's basically natural philosophy from the Renaissance through the German idealism. I quoted Goethe. It's the same idea. And what is interesting about this idea, and I think Goethe made it most explicit, that if we think in this kind of model of a, I don't know, Ilyenkov does not say equilibrium, but a kind of, this would be Goethe's, maybe Goethe's expression, but for Ilyenkov, the interaction matters. So he really thinks on a cosmological level here. But if we take this serious, then humanity as a part of nature is, of course, involved in it. So this has consequences. Can you own nature? So can you own people? What does this ownership mean exactly? I don't know, wage labor already a kind of exchange which involves property exchange or not? And these kind of questions are alluded to, let's say, because of the model that nature basically thinks itself, matter thinks itself, right? So I think it's in the question of the liberal, classical Lockean liberal apology for property, where we could find ecological motives, even in this very, speculative cosmological piece.
Great, thank you. Ivan, next.
Hi, thanks everybody. Thanks, Sascha. Very nice presentation, even though we couldn't hear bits. So I read it again, like I promised, and your presentation of the paper as an ethics, I think, is a good way to read it and to receive it, and it kind of binds the thing together. My question is about the philosophy. Do you think the philosophy, the argument, if you like, is finished, or do you think it should be tidied up? One example is change through the paper of terms like thinking brain. So Ilyenkov at the beginning uses the phrase thinking brain. There's changes to thinking body, thinking matter, even the idea of humanity and so on. So do you think that's okay? Do you think that should be corrected? Or do you think that kind of is part of what's happening in the paper?
Yeah, I would say part of the problem here is the level of interpretation, or the perspective you have on the text. Of course, each perspective has its own kind of parallaxes and so on. So what you group together really very much depends on this. I try to interpret it as a cosmological piece. So for me, I think there's not a big issue. I think Majdansky was drawing on this development in Ilyenkov's thought, because here he uses brain sometimes as a synonym for thinking matter, which of course somehow is in tension with the debate he later had with the physiologists, with the neurologists, and so on. But I don't think that's a big issue here. Even in the text itself, you can see that when the argument advances, he speaks in very general terms of thinking matter. Yeah? This can be, it's not only humans, for example,
Yeah.
could be thought of, and so on. I think for the sake of the argument he wants to make here in this kind of very generalized cosmological frame, there's no big issue. I think the issue rather comes in if you think he had to think as a philosopher of praxis here. No, but that's not that's certainly then a totally different vocabulary. But I think it is coherent, or it is consistent. It can be connected with the later work. It's not completely a kind of break. I think what we can see in the piece is that he does something what he also later does, only on different levels, namely that he wants to find out why is there thought, or what's the role, what should we do with thinking. Yeah, and this entails a temporal vision too, because as you know, socialism was realized. This was told to the people by the party, right? We have it, but for Ilyenkov, no, we cannot have it yet. We cannot have it yet because the highest grade would be to have this kind of fatal decision being made anonymously. We are not there yet, so we need to work on it too. I think that's part of, I would say, the political undercurrent in this kind of frame, and that's why it probably remained always unpublished. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Paul next, and then Boris.
Yeah, I'd like to, first of all, let me say thank you, Sascha. That was very good. I hope what we can do is, we can fill in the bits that we couldn't hear when we get the transcript. We can see the bits that have been, that were impossible to hear in it, because I thought it was a very interesting piece of what you were saying there. But I'd just like to follow on with this discussion and suggest that my understanding of the text of Cosmology of the Spirit is that a certain sense that the sacrifice is not just the whole of humanity, if you like, thinking they need to bring a new universe into being, but also the kind of sacrifice that everybody makes, not everybody, but most people make, who do something when they're that's unselfish. All you need to do is to do something where you're not the beneficiary, somebody else is the beneficiary, and there is a certain sacrifice in that, because you're sacrificing your very self, your individual self, by doing some unselfish act. And of course, that has a very long-standing religious dimension to it. So, if you like, what I'm trying to say is that we can't. We're millions and millions, billions of years off the end of the universe at the moment, but nevertheless, what we can do with our own lives is just be a little less selfish and do things that are unselfish, that participate in that cosmic process of the regeneration of the world. I mean, do you think that's a viable sort of a thing that we can take away from the text?
Yeah, I think so. That's a possible reading. Yeah, I think what is important here is the question again of how we define this sacrificial almost a musical sacrifice he seems to think about. For him, he speaks of not of a sacrifice. He doesn't use this kind of like religious language. He even thinks that the religious sensibility will actually dissolve once we realize what are the implications of this hypothesis which he presents. And he presents it as a hypothesis, but as, so to say, one.
Can't hear you, Sasha. While you're waiting, we're waiting for Sasha. Please look at the chat because there's some very important contributions that Riley has just put a comment on De Remus's remark. Please, can you all see that? And Sasha's put a remark as well. Can you see? Can everybody read that? All right. And while we're waiting for Sasha, please, Carol, did you want to appoint the next speaker or hand over?
Yeah, I do need to run off in a minute. Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. I'm interested in the role of alienation here and kind of what he's talking about, the limits of the traditional understanding of alienation.
The limits of the understanding of alienation. I think the direct relation would again be not that direct, but by way of thinking humanity as a part of nature. It is, and thinking as an attribute. And this means that different relations of, for example, property categories are in question. I think that this may be the most fruitful connection to the question of alienation, because these German philosopher Peter said basically what Ilyenkov's Discussion is the task of organized development or socialist revolution. And the socialist revolution is, of course, also called property. And that includes everything needs for everybody. And now seems logical. I think these are questions where we then can further think about. But it is not directly in the text itself. It is rather through this idea when matter and thought are in this kind of interaction that he describes, then what does this mean for our own conceptions of space, of property, of nature, and so on?
Good answer. Thanks, Sasha. And question from Boris.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you, Sasha, for your summary. I enjoyed listening to this as much as I enjoyed reading the Ilyenkov's essay. My question is as follows. This is a very rich work, full of, very poetic, full of pathos. And in many ways, I can interpret it as a metaphor. However, if Ilyenkov's intention was indeed to contribute to, physical, cosmological aspect of this story, in other words, the way he sees the universe developing is if, cosmology needs help. The universe eventually might need help to get out of this thermal death paradox. But I
Right.
in his view, at 50 years ago, the cosmological models were not presenting this solution. And I'm wondering whether perhaps he would have written this piece differently today, because there have been some advances in the theory and cosmological models. For example, Roger Penrose fairly recently came up with this idea of conformal cyclic cosmology, where he presents this thermal depth as eventually a state of the universe where, everything cools down, all the matter disappears, always the radiation, no structure remains, no usable energy exists. So physics becomes featureless. And the time scales disappear because there are no clocks which can measure times. Length scales disappear. There are no rulers
Yes.
which can measure length.
It's
And
also
eventually he
called
says
the
the universe
pulsating universe.
effectively. Yeah. So at that point, his idea is that the universe essentially rescales back to the point and resulting in a new Big Bang. So what would have Ilyenkov said about this kind of idea? Because it seems to me that if this doesn't leave any space for intervention.
I think that was none of his concern. He actually did not want to contribute to physical cosmology. But he pointed, exactly as you say, to a problem, a kind of trap in the model. So if we have one beginning, is then there also one end? And all these questions Kant would filed under Schein Probleme, because we cannot really know. We can only find some kind of proofs. And I think physical cosmology is that. But the proofs also found today still speak, for example, of Big Bang. So even though there are other, and of course in science necessarily needs to be, and I think this is rather what Ilyenkov insists in, if you want to do scientific theory, you need this kind of speculations, other alternatives. You need this kind of interaction in order to keep the dynamics of research going. But for him, there was not. It was not the aim to really improve physics. He just says, okay, they don't have an answer yet. I don't think he would, in this respect, be writing different. I think the whole point is to take specific, let's say, doctrines. Also, science often is perceived as a kind of production of facts. Later on, you can say, okay, this is a fact, but a fact is a kind of the knowledge that we have now. So it cannot be absolute. I think it's rather these kind of processes where he was interested in, and not so much in the actual physical models, or how we could model it in a better way. I think he would still say, okay, even if we have models now to think that the universe pulsates on its own, then still we have the same question. So how do we put thought into the picture if it's not just a historical product of the development of the cosmos itself. Also brings forth matter. Then only then it is a interaction in principle and not just by coincidence.
Great answer. Thanks, Sascha. Questioners are queuing up now. So, Katie, could you go next?
Yeah, thanks, Sascha. I was a bit late, and then part of your talk were freezing. But anyway, thanks. But before I ask a question, I wanted to react to George's comment here about the meta, that the mistake of Ilyenkov is that thought for him is the attribute of matter, whereas it should be a form of development of nature itself, of matter itself. So I think that what is crucial for him, that yes, it develops out of nature itself. I mean, the thought, and thought is part and parcel of nature, but he has the irreversible stage, which is labor, and he constantly means that. So this irreversibility of labor and consequently human labor is crucial for him. And I mean, it was criticized by many scholars, post-human scholars as well. But nevertheless, this self-obsession of his with the human thought, and thought as something which belongs to human, notwithstanding how the humans will look and what kind of creatures they might become, is really really surprising. And in this connection, I would think that we mentioned the word sacrifice many times, but also Sascha coined a very beautiful concept by the end, resignated enthusiasm. Yeah, I like it very much. So I think that this consent, this voluntary, tragic consent, almost Wagnerian consent for eclipse, has nothing to do with ecological sustainability. On the contrary, I think if we were to imagine this kind of subjectivity that wants to precipitate the eclipse, this would be rather the evading of sustenance and sustainability to precipitate towards the inevitability of this eclipse, if this can be at all imagined. Well,
yeah, but this is more a scale problem. No?
Sorry?
This is a problem of scale. It is a problem of scale, I would say, because he does not speak about, of course, and this is what I always emphasized in the talk. It is a cosmological piece. We really need to take it serious in this. This is really serious about it. And of course, then it's not about preservation of nature in terms of the biosphere. No, nature is there even if the Earth is destroyed or it's uninhabitable. But I think this is why I said it is indirectly, we can link it indirectly to ecological thought, in that we take serious the premise. If there's this interaction, or if we what is probably easier to say is that if we are really part of nature, if so to say, we think nature or something like this. This was the idea of the German idealists, of Schelling especially. Nature through human thinks itself. Then we also can question certain conceptions which are problematic in ecological discourse and action, because property rights, commons, things like that, they would be very much differently conceptualized if it's not based on this kind of everything what I produce, everything what I buy is my property. So you can also buy the labor time of something else. So then this is your property. So in a sense, it would be kind of weird to say, in this sense, you buy a human. Yeah. This is a rather indirect way to connect it, but otherwise you are correct. It is not about nature in the planetary sense, but really in a cosmological sense. And in this respect, I think your first impression was right. It is Ilyenkov insists on thinking about path dependency. If we do one thing, this will lead to something else. If we go in this direction, then this will have consequences, because we always build on the, let's say, infrastructures we already manifested. I think this is something which is in the background. Absolutely, this is so to say that the ethical impulse comes from the concern that you are not striving for this society of the future, because it can only come about if we do so. We can only perform it, so to say.
But I didn't ask my question, actually. I wanted yes, but thanks. It was amazing what you to hear your answer. But just to ask about this term resignation. So resignated enthusiasm. This word, do you use it as a metaphor, as an aesthetic term? Because we know this in Marxist aesthetics only from Lifshitz. Otherwise,
Right.
how to refer to it? So it's quite understandable in Lifshitz's aesthetics, but do we come across it generally in socialist cultural theory, or even in Marxism as such? Or is this some kind of contradiction to Marxism, or even to, this avant-garde mobilization preoccupation, which we...
Yeah, I think I understand. I think the issue is Prometheanism.
Yeah, okay.
So, of course, Prometheanism is kind of, and we still have the problem with this faith in automatic social emancipatory progress when we do more technological progress or something like this. Very much questioned today, of course. But especially in, I would say, the socialist bloc was still under not all the philosophers, not all thinkers, not all scholars, not all people, but the state apparatus was in itself legitimized by idea of progress. And in this sense, I would say is a deep ambiguity in the socialist project. And I think Ilyenkov pointed to some of this, and this is why it is interesting that on this very general cosmological level, he deals with contradictions, which also have effects on a very concrete, like everyday political level. So the resignation, of course, comes from an insight into historical development. And the capacities of people and so on. But it is not like conservative anthropology or something. But it is rather the question that we don't gain an immediate let's say recognition, but maybe recognition from others, but immediate let's say, value, surplus value from the actions towards socialism. That's, I think, in a nutshell, what he wants to say.
Great, good, thanks. There's a lot going on in the chat as well. People should keep up with that. I see Paul and George are queued up. I'll invite Paul in, but we're 10 minutes from the end. We're slightly over time. So anyone who hasn't spoken yet, who wants to ask a question or make a quick comment, get prepared and put your hand up. But here's Paul.
Yeah, thank you. I'll try and be quick. I just want to come back to what Boris said and the comments that Boris made, because I think it is actually very important that we do look at how our philosophy relates to actual real physical processes in the universe. And that, I think, is very important, because at the end of the day, there has to be a unity of the sciences. There can't be just philosophy going off in one direction and science going off in another direction. And one of the things I would say about Roger Penrose's theory is that, of course, it's in the West, at least, it's regarded as a very minority theory. He's got a bunch of loyal followers, I'm one of them, but most people actually disregard it as just being Penrose being a little bit, he's probably suffering from dementia in his old age or something like that, which I think is crazy, because I think it's a great theory and it's actually very well grounded. The thing I would say about Penrose's theory is that even Penrose himself says, in the course of elaborating the theory, that the universe forgets itself. And he uses the word forget in a metaphorical way. So that taps in with what another contributor said. So it's a very metaphorical understanding of it. But he said the universe forgets how big it is. And if you like, in that sense, the process of sacrifice, if you like, or the process of labor is a sense of remembering. And, so I think it dovetails very, very well. What we're doing is remembering, we're recalling that ancient pact with nature that we've got. It's paying the debt back. It's a remembering of that debt. And it's exactly that brings about the new the new cosmos to start with. Okay, well, I've said enough, so I won't say anymore.
That's a nice remark. I would just say we let it stay as it is. I think that there's something to it. But I was, of course, talking now, so to say, as someone who read the text. So I was thinking in terms of what the text does, and of course, Ilyenkov takes science very seriously. Yeah, he takes the physical cosmology of its day. He takes into account, as me and Martin Küpper also explained in the introduction to the German translation we just published, also the history of science and technology of its day. As I said, I only hinted at this. It is after Hiroshima's, so we have a nuclear energy question and what to do with it. And we have also the obligation of developing further the socialist project. So both of these things he wants to bring together here.
Maybe what we could do is we could take this as an invitation to try Ilyenkov's argument about the ethic, but using contemporary physics as a kind of implementation.
And I think Paul already elaborated on this, and that's I think fair. Yeah, you could say that.
Okay, George in a minute, but we're going to close at past, so everyone be getting their hands ready. A couple of good ones in the chat, especially Olga Ivashuk has a kind of maybe opposing assessment from Sascha's. It might be worth a look. So, George, over to you.
Okay. I would like to say that we should be careful not to overinterpret Ilyenkov. Within the context of the piece, this philosophical piece itself, there is no word concerning labor. We shouldn't project retrospectively the idea of labor. Okay, so let me very quickly explain why it is necessary to identify thought with nature as a necessary attribute of nature from the very start, as a kind of congenital property in the essence, in the substance of nature itself. Because he has to provide an account for its necessity, for its necessary existence. Otherwise, if he doesn't provide this necessity of thought as an attribute of nature, it means that it is contingent. So the whole schema of the self-sacrifice of a humanity, of a rational humanity, because he says at some point that there is no need that humanity may be reborn again, but some other kind of rational species will also sacrifice itself for the regeneration of the universe. So this whole schema of a repetitive death and rebirth of nature wouldn't exist if thought wasn't necessary. So he has to put the identification of thought as a necessary attribute of nature from the very beginning. That's why this is his opening argument, actually. But he's mistaken in that, okay? Because thought doesn't exist with the genesis of the universe. It requires the formation of life, and life is the precondition for the generation of the human species, of the emergence of the human species, and on the basis of the human species, the generation of the thinking capacity.
Yeah, of course, Ilyenkov knows exactly and very well this kind of argumentation. I mean, that's the historical way to explain it. But as I said, he uses the authority of Engels to say, well, Engels speaks of something of a frame of argument where we could explain thought as emerging as a necessity in nature, not by some kind of lightning in the primordial soup or something, but in terms of the necessity. And so his argument is not historical, it is speculative. It is a kind of, we could also think of it as a thought experiment, I would say. And that's why I think it is not a bad piece, even if we would not agree with all of the scientific claims he made. He is very transparent in saying, if we think that, then this follows. And this is, of course, where he also exaggerates the doctrines at times. As I said, it takes kind of image of a specific moment in the development of the sciences as somehow authoritative. But at the same time, uses authorities like Engels to subvert these kind of doctrines, right? And this is, I think, where we can see the worth of the text and how he tries to think certain premises to the end. Of course, this is not a piece you would teach in terms of a Marxist view about how thought emerged. It was always there. No, it is not meant historically. It is meant, as I said, in a categorical way. Thought and matter are, so to say, always there in terms of the cosmos and this whole history, because it needed the premises, it needs to emerge by necessity. And if it emerges by a necessity, then you can say, infinitely speaking, thought and matter are always there. Of course, as an exaggeration, it's obvious that you could do this kind of maneuver with almost anything. But this is, yeah, he makes it very explicit, these kind of steps. You can, at each sentence he utters in the text, you can say, wait a minute, is that right? Yeah, that's absolutely a good attitude towards the knowledge of the text. My emphasis was therefore, what does Ilyenkov perform? Yeah, why does he write such a text? What is, so to say, the implicit ethics in it? That was rather my question.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot more going on in the text than the cosmology. As has been said, it's a very kind of multifaceted text. But anyway, very lively debate. There's obviously a lot to be argued about. Sascha, if you were reading from a text, would you be able to share the text and then
I can share it.
bits that we couldn't hear we could have a look at? That would be brilliant.
Yeah, sorry for that.
That's okay, not your fault. It's the interwebs. So we're coming to the end of the meeting. If there's any last quick questions, now's your chance. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Corinna to wrap up.
Thank you, Ivan, and thank you very much, Sascha. And sorry about the interruptions, but we'll look forward to your written text and we can share it along with maybe a few points from the chat. I just want to flag up, and sorry, thank you again and for everybody for your comments.